This is your protein mega guide. In this video, we're going to cover everything you need to know about protein for healthy eating. We're going to start by talking about what healthy proteins are and what is the nutrition of protein. And this is going to include a discussion about something called a complete protein. Then we're going to dive into protein contents in different types of food so that you can have a basic understanding of which foods are providing you how much protein. Then we're going to start talking about my 4 favorite plant-based protein sources that you can include in your diet. And then we'll use that information to talk about 4 plant-based protein meal ideas that you can start making for yourself or your family. So that by the end of this video, you're going to be so excited with so many ideas for how you can jumpstart your health with eating more protein in an easy way. Hey there, I'm Dr. Anna. I'm a medical doctor. I was trained in Italy. And on this channel, you are going to learn how to master your health. So let's dive in. All right, first we're going to talk about the nutrition of protein and what a complete protein is. Let's start with a little bit of basic physiology and overall functionality of our body. Proteins are an essential nutrient of our diet. All of us know that. We know that you need to have a certain amount of protein, and that can change during different parts of our lifetime. Most of us are familiar with the concept that protein is really important for growth in our body. It's why the age-old wisdom to children to drink more milk even exists in the first place, because protein is really important for growth. Most of our body is actually made up of proteins. All cells in our body have protein in them, and all of the organs and the tissues in our body have protein as an essential component of what make them up. Now, in terms of the functionality, proteins play a role in almost every function in our body. It has to do with our metabolic processes, it has to do with communication in our bodies and signaling things from one organ system to another. So if our cardiovascular system wants to talk to our digestive system, which talks to our brain, somewhere along the way, proteins are going to be involved. Now, the important thing to think about when it comes to protein in our diets is that not all proteins are created equally. So I want to highlight for you here some of the science and basic biochemistry of protein so that you can understand how to weave this into your diet in an extremely useful and practical way. Let's start by defining what a complete protein is. A complete protein is something that provides our body with all 9 essential amino acids. Now, there are many more than 9 amino acids that exist, but the way our metabolism works and the biochemistry in our bodies works is that we can synthesize, another word for create, a lot of the amino acids that our body needs to do all of its functionality, except for 9 of them. There are 9 that we must get from food, from our diet, so that our body can then use it to do other metabolic processes, put it into a lot of different chemical reactions, and ultimately keep us alive. Now, I'm not going to list all of them for you here. It's a bit of a mouthful. There are things like histidine, leucine, lysine, isoleucine, valine. Maybe you've seen some of these in the supplement shelves of your grocery store or health food store. But what you need to understand is that the way nutrition works is that if we have a variety of foods in our diet that allow us to get in all of the nutrients our body needs, like these 9 essential amino acids, then we are well equipped to do everything that our body needs to do in terms of its metabolism, the system functions of each of our organs, and some of that growth. So you can think of amino acids as the building blocks of proteins, and proteins themselves for the building blocks of almost everything else in your body. Your hair, your skin, your nails, your organs, all of these things have protein in them, as well as things like enzymes, which are these protein molecules that cause chemical reactions to happen. If you found this video useful for you, or if you think it's going to be useful for someone else that you care about, please consider sharing this. Spread the awareness, teach other people what you learned today. Your body depends on it. Okay, so that was a lot of science and that was a lot of technical terminology. How about the practical tips? What do you actually need to know about protein in order for you to reap the benefits of it? Well, the truth is, you don't really need to keep track of all of these 9 essential amino acids because most foods that are protein rich already have all 9 of them. That is why they're called a complete protein. They complete the picture of us by giving us all 9 of these things. So what are some examples of a complete protein? Well, any kind of meat, fish, dairy source, so this could be something that derives from milk, like yogurt, cheese, as well as eggs. But if you are somebody who is not eating meat or not eating animal products at all, fear not, there are plenty of plant sources that are also complete proteins. Some of these are grains, like quinoa, amaranth, or buckwheat. Also, soy is a complete protein. But here's a fantastic fact for you. You can also combine certain foods to reach all 9 essential amino acids when they're in combination. This is an absolute game changer for anybody who is vegan or vegetarian, because some of the common healthy foods that we eat a lot of if we're not eating animal products are going to be things like legumes, beans, lentils, and a lot of whole grains. Now, the cool thing that you might not realize is these things end up being eaten together in traditional diets around the world. Think about beans and rice, something that we see in a lot of different cultures. Now, why is that a good combination? It's not just because it's super tasty, but when you combine beans and rice, you are hitting all 9 of those essential amino acids. So by eating them together, you're creating a complete protein for yourself. Some other good examples of this are hummus and pita bread. Again, hummus being something that comes from a bean, which are chickpeas, or ceci in Italian, one of my favorite words, but also having lentils with most other whole grains. So when you combine these things together in the meal, you are creating for yourself the nutrition that your body needs to do everything it wants to do when it comes to protein. But here's the kicker. And this is where some people really get confused. It's not their fault that they get confused, because nutrition is a lot of technical information and there's a lot of detail to understand how to put the whole picture together. But I'm going to give you a little piece of advice that one of my professors in my nutrition program when I got my bachelor's degree gave to us. And it's that you might not remember what you eat, but the body remembers. Now, what do I mean by that? So the key to getting all 9 essential amino acids into your diet is not just about having all of them in one meal. If you had rice with your lunch, but then you have beans with your dinner, the body remembers. The body gets all of those 9 essential amino acids when you combine them over time. Now, of course, the body is doing its metabolism all of the time. So if you only have beans for 7 days straight and then you only have rice for 7 days straight, that's going to be a little bit challenging. But as long as you're eating all of the foods that balance each other out in the same time frame, generally speaking, you're going to be okay. And the same goes for meat. There are a lot of people who are not vegan or vegetarian, but they just want to cut back on their meat consumption. Maybe this is for moral or ethical reasons, or also just ecological reasons. So as long as you're consuming a variety of food sources that overall are giving you all of the essential amino acids you need, you're doing great. Your diet is considered complete. So you can piece together all of the essential nutrients that you need to have an overall nutritious and full diet. So whether you're a plant-based eater, a meat eater, or a combination of the two, now you are well equipped with a lot of useful tips and knowledge so that you can get all of the nutritional requirements for your body from your diet. Now let's turn our attention over to the protein contents of different types of foods, and we'll learn how to calculate the amount of protein in your meal. Let's first discuss a little bit about some basic nutrition of protein. So protein is really important because it helps us grow and repair things inside the body. We need muscle when we're a kid because our bones are growing, our muscles are growing. We need protein for building healthy joints. And believe it or not, we really need protein, especially as we age and grow older, because it helps maintain our muscle mass, which is super important for preventing problems like falls and fractures. Now, protein itself is one of the major structural components of our body. Pretty much every cell in our body is made up of protein. Everything from our hair, our skin, our nails, our bones, our organs, our eyeballs, you name it. Now, as I said, most people are not eating enough. So here's the thing. In general, when we eat food, we are eating foods that are composed of one of 3, or maybe 2 or all 3, of the major macronutrients, which are the different categories of nutrients. So these are proteins, fats, or carbs. Now, protein is sort of the one that gets the least amount of press. I'm not really sure why, but it's probably because there's so much debate about how much carbohydrate or how much fat or how much of each of those things in proportion we should be eating in a healthy diet. And to be honest, there's not a straight answer from both nutrition science and different dietary practices across the population and across the whole world. But the one thing that is common in every culture is the importance of having enough protein. So what is the amount that we're supposed to eat? Well, it's not possible for me to tell you a number without having us do a little bit of basic math. So stay with me here. I promise this is not complicated. Now, the minimum requirement that is generally used as the marker for what adult who is finished growing should consume is the following. We are going to think about what is our body weight in kilograms. Now, if you're listening to this video from the United States, you're probably used to thinking of your body weight in terms of pounds. But for this calculation, we do need to convert it to kilograms. So you have to think about what your body weight is in terms of kilograms. And what you really need to do is think about your ideal body weight. For somebody of your height, your age, and your biological sex, what is the ideal weight that your body should be? And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you are overweight or underweight, you want to make this calculation for the protein needs of your body based off of the healthy body weight. So this is going to be a range, but in general, you want to think about what is your ideal body weight and what is it in kilograms. That's where we start. Then I want you to do this math with me. Calculate 1 gram of protein for every kilogram of your ideal body weight. Let's do a really easy example. For someone who's 165 pounds, that's going to correlate to about 75 kilograms. So 75 kilos times 1 gram of protein is about 75 grams of protein. So that's the general marker that somebody should eat to make sure they're having the adequate needs. Now, the number that the US FDA uses as the cutoff point for the recommended minimum amount is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So recognize that 0.8 is the minimum required to not be deficient. That's not really the recommended amount for optimal health. So I like, for easier math, to just round that up to 1 because it's so much easier than thinking about what is 80% of a number. Just think of what is 100% of a number. So what does this correspond to for gram amounts of protein? Well, from our example, we could see that about 75 grams of protein would be an easy target for someone who's around 165 pounds or 75 kilos. Now, if you look at the FDA guidelines, they're going to recommend about 50 grams of protein to not be deficient. So you can already see that 50 grams to 75 grams, that's quite a bit of difference. But let's say you're not just 165 pounds or 75 kilos. What if you weigh more than that? Or what if your protein requirements are higher than that? For example, if you're an athlete and you're lifting a lot of weight, well, it's easy. You can just do the calculation, but you have to increase the number of grams per kilogram of your ideal body weight. So this is what this would look like. We're going to calculate the ideal range for yourself. What most guidelines are going to tell you is that you need, as a range, from 0.8 grams of protein for every kilogram of your ideal body weight to 1.6. Now, I don't know about you, but the numbers 0.8 and 1.6 are already making my head spin. So I think it's so much easier to just calculate from 1 to 2. You know that the 1 is going to be a pretty good target for meeting your needs, and the 2 is going to be probably above the range that you actually need to eat. So what would this look like? For somebody who's 75 kilos, that person would need to have anywhere from 75 grams to 150 grams of protein a day. Now, that's a pretty wide range. And as we said, that 2 grams per kilogram of body weight is probably higher than most people need, even for athletes. But we just want to do that for simplicity's sake. So let's work backwards now. Let's say we're going to shoot for eating 100 grams of protein a day. Well, if we're eating 3 meals a day, what's that going to look like? A third, a third, a third. You could do it like that. So maybe roughly 33 grams of protein per meal. But what if you're someone who only eats 2 meals a day? Maybe you don't actually eat breakfast and you're just a lunch and dinner eater. Well, that's not that difficult. We could just take that number 100 and divide it by 2, which means at each meal, you want to target about 50 grams of protein. Are you still with me? I know that math was a lot, but I'd like you to please subscribe to this channel because I promise your subscription is going to make learning all of this material a lot easier so you can keep repeating the information. And it also helps us get these videos out to more folks who really deserve to learn this information. So now that we have some basic understanding of our nutritional requirements for protein, let's make this way more practical of a discussion. Let's get some understanding about protein foods. So thinking about protein in our diet, we have to think about what is a general serving of protein. Well, that's considered about 3 ounces of fish or meat, about 1 whole egg or 2 egg whites if you're just having the egg white. This could look like about a 1/4 cup of cooked beans or lentils, about a tablespoon of nut butter, like peanut butter or almond butter, for example, or a 1/2 ounce of whole nuts. Now, according to the American Heart Association, for adults who are finished growing, they should try to aim for getting at least 5.5 ounces of protein foods a day. What does that look like? Well, 3 ounces of a protein food, like fish or meat, for example, is about the size of a deck of cards. The other way people can describe this is, depending on the size of your hand, is about the size of the palm of your hand. So if you're looking at the palm of your hand and you think, okay, that might be 3 ounces, but I want to get to about 5.5 or 6 ounces a day, about 2 portions of fish or meat would possibly get you there. Now, you don't actually have to know how to do all the calculations for how many ounces is how many grams and how do I structure my meal plan accordingly. That is the work of a dietitian or a nutritional counselor. I'm simply trying to give you a basic understanding if you are craving that for eating healthy. So now let's say you want to understand if the meal that you typically make for yourself is giving you enough protein. Well, let's talk about putting some numbers of how many grams of protein are in some typical servings of protein-rich foods in our diet. And for this discussion, I'm going to stick with protein foods that are typical in the Mediterranean diet because I'm not trying to lead any of you astray. I want to promote the healthiest options of nutrition that we can possibly find. And we know that the Mediterranean diet is one of the healthiest approaches to eating there is. Okay, so here's some typical foods that you might be cooking in your Mediterranean approach or just your general healthy eating approach. About 1 cup of cooked beans or lentils is going to be about 18 grams of protein. About 3 or 3.5 ounces of lean chicken breast is going to be about 30 grams of protein. About 3 or 3.5 ounces of fish, maybe it's tilapia, salmon, cod, well, that's going to give us roughly 25 grams of protein. About 6 ounces of Greek yogurt, or the size of an individual cup of yogurt that you could find in a grocery store, that's going to give us about 17 grams of protein. And then a 1/4 cup of nuts or seeds. That's going to give us between 7 and 8 grams of protein. About a tablespoon of peanut butter will give us about 4 grams. 1 egg gives us about 6 grams. 2 egg whites will give us about 10 grams of protein. A 1/4 cup of crumbled feta cheese is going to give us around 5.5 grams of protein. And then a 6-ounce serving of cottage cheese is going to be around 18 grams of protein. So those are some of the most potent sources of healthy proteins in our diet. But are there other ways that we can get protein in besides these foods? Well, that is where whole grains come into the discussion. The more whole grains we are eating in our diet, the more boosts of protein we're actually taking in. And that's because grains in their whole form often have a little bit of protein as a part of them. So let's give some examples. These are all going to be the amount of protein for 1 cup cooked of each of the following grains. Quinoa is going to give us around 8 grams. Farro is going to give us around 6.5 grams of protein. Barley is going to give us 5.5 grams of protein. Amaranth is going to give us around 9.5 grams of protein. So you get the idea. If we're incorporating more whole grains in our diet, which the Mediterranean diet emphasizes to do as much as possible, we are actually boosting up the protein level without even realizing it. So let's take this information and put it together and calculate how much protein would a classic meal on the Mediterranean diet give us. Let's take the example of a simple Mediterranean grain bowl salad. And this could be incorporating any kind of whole grain and any kind of salad vegetables that you'd want. And we're going to put it together and do a little math. So let's say, for example, that for 1 serving for yourself, you're going to include 1/2 cup of cooked whole grains. Well, let's guesstimate that this is going to be about 4 grams of protein it gives us. Let's say you wanted to incorporate then about 1/2 cup of beans. Well, this might give you around 9 grams of protein. And then maybe you want to add a little bit of crumbled feta cheese onto your salad. Well, even just a 1/4 cup of crumbled feta cheese might give us about 5.5 grams of protein. So this totals it up to about 18.5 grams of protein just from those 3 ingredients in our salad. And for easy math's sake, let's say you put a little bit more than 1/2 cup of the whole grains and a little bit more than 1/2 cup of beans, and that rounds our number up to 20 grams of protein. I guess we're not doing too bad so far, but maybe you want to add a protein-rich food, a food that is specifically giving us a high amount of protein onto the salad. Maybe it's salmon, or maybe it's sardines, maybe it's chicken breast, maybe it's hard-boiled egg. What would happen if we added a very protein-rich food on top of our healthy base of a salad grain bowl? Well, for example, you might be adding an additional 10, 20, or even 30 grams of protein to that base. So if our base salad is going to be about 20 grams of protein, and then we're adding protein foods onto it, you do the math, you might be having about 30 to even 50 grams of protein just at this one meal. And if you've been following from the beginning of this video, you might realize that giving yourself 50 grams of protein at a meal, well, you're already meeting your minimum requirements to sustain your healthy weight. But additionally, you're setting yourself up to not be anywhere close to deficient. Now, I don't know about you, but that is exactly where I would want to be. Now let's talk about the 4 best plant-based protein foods that you can incorporate into your diet today. When it comes to plant-based sources of protein, there is no food that is pure protein and nothing else nutrient-wise. And this is different than animal sources sources of protein. When we're eating meat, there's virtually no carbohydrate in there, but there's protein and some fat. When we're eating egg white, that is 100% pure protein. But if we're eating something like a legume, it's going to have a mixture of protein, carb, and some fat. So just keep that in mind as we go over these foods. The other thing I want you to keep in mind as we go over this list is for sure you could buy extracted protein as a supplement, like a protein powder, from any of these kinds of foods. Often you'll see it as a pea protein powder, but we're not actually describing that in this video. We're only going to go over whole forms of food. And the other thing to keep in mind is that plant-based food sources are actually very nutritious for many reasons beyond their protein. So as we describe some of these foods, keep in mind there's going to be a lot of other nutrients like fiber, vitamins or minerals, or even healthy fats in some of these foods, if not in all of them. And that's not to say that's not true of animal products. For sure, meat and animal products also provide other nutrients besides protein, but it's just something I want you to keep in mind. And the other thing I want you to keep in mind as we run through this list is that since these plant-based protein sources are not pure protein, per the amount of protein you would get compared to an animal form of protein, you actually need a lot more volume. So for somebody who's vegan, this is why to be vegan well, you do need to eat a lot of these foods because otherwise you're just not going to be getting enough protein. And since we're talking about plant and animal protein sources, this is actually a perfect time to emphasize why I love the Mediterranean diet so much is that it has a really healthy balance between the amount of plant-based protein sources and the amount of animal-based protein sources. And I think that hitting that balance is what it's all about. All right, without further ado, these are the top 4 foods. Number 1, we have beans. So in the Mediterranean diet, there are so many types of beans and a huge variety of ways you can actually incorporate beans. Think of things like garbanzo beans, which are called ceci in Italian, or things like cannellini beans, white kidney beans. We could have red kidney beans. We could have black beans. You could use butter beans. Literally any kind of bean would be appropriate in the Mediterranean diet. One of the main foods that you'll see in a lot of Mediterranean cultures is the hummus. That's the ground up garbanzo bean that's added to it with olive oil, some lemon juice, maybe some garlic or other flavorings and tahini, and it makes that creamy paste that's so easy for spreading on a sandwich, for dipping things into like vegetables, you name it. Hummus is one of the most versatile foods you can eat. Now, when it comes to beans, I like to stretch this category and include any kind of a legume that would maybe provide some protein. So I like to think of peas as sort of falling in this category. They're a very starchy vegetable, but they have a decent amount of protein in them, so you can think of them in the same way you would think of a bean when it comes to preparing your meals. They could be tossed into soups, they can be sauteed in stir fries, they could even be put on a salad or mashed up. However you like to eat your peas or beans, you may. All right, what's the second food of our plant-based protein sources? Well, this is gonna be lentils. Now, lentils are a really cool food because they're really easy to cook and they're often faster to cook than a lot of these beans. Lentils are one of the easiest things to make into a soup or a stew because they break down really easily and have a nice, grainy, gritty texture, which makes the consistency of a soup or a stew super creamy. Like beans, lentils are really rich in protein and fiber. So you're gonna get 2 out of your 3 components of the healthy trifecta just from this one food. And the nice thing about lentils, and it's true of beans, is that they're really cheap to buy. These are some of the most affordable foods in the grocery store, and they're really shelf stable. You buy them dry, they can stay in a glass jar or a plastic container for months before cooking them, and they're still good to go. And by the way, if you're liking this content so far, go ahead and subscribe and join our community. This community is so much fun to be a part of. Everybody is bouncing recipe ideas and food and meal planning ideas in the comment section. You don't want to miss out. All right, what's the third category of plant-based protein foods that the Mediterranean diet is so abundant in? Well, this is going to be some whole grains. Now, not all whole grains actually are providing our body with protein. There are certain whole grains that are more abundant in protein than others. Things like farro or quinoa, brown rice, or even whole rolled oats. Now, these are not going to be a huge amount of protein in our diet, but it's just going to give us a little bit of a boost. And just like with the legumes, whole grains are going to provide us with a lot of other nutrients, including things like fiber, which is so important for healthy digestion. They're also similar to legumes in the fact that they're super versatile. You can eat all of these things on their own, cooked. You can make them into a salad with lots of different vegetables combined with legumes, other types of protein foods, lots of herbs or spices, and they can get really aromatic and flavorful. They can be the nice base inside of a casserole, or you can throw them into a soup or a stew themselves. They just add a really nice bulk component to our diet and are overall really cheap to buy. Now, if you have no idea how to cook some of these things, I have a few videos for you. You might want to check out how to cook quinoa up here, and I have a nice recipe over here for a quinoa Mediterranean diet bowl. You don't want to miss that. It's super tasty. But I do have other videos on this channel, such as how to cook farro and make some other recipes, so make sure to check out the channel page for more videos about food. We're about to reveal our fourth category of food, and before we do that, I want you to comment below and tell me what you think about plant-based protein sources. This can be a source of confusion for people, and I don't want to make any of you feel confused or misled, so make sure to throw your comments below. We can have a discussion. If you have further questions about this topic, I would love to know what they are so that I can make more videos and answer your questions. All right, so our fourth category of plant-based protein foods are going to be nuts or seeds. Nuts and seeds are such cool little gems in our diet because they're so full of flavor. They're really shelf stable. They have many varieties and many flavors, and they can be used in so many different ways. We can eat them plain, we can have them raw, we can roast them, which changes up their flavor profile. We can cook with them, we can bake with them, we can ground them up and to make things like a paste. Think of an almond butter, a cashew butter, or a peanut butter. There are certain classics that are used in so many Mediterranean dishes, things like sesame, pistachios, almonds, and even hazelnuts. These flavors are just so delicious. You can pair them with fish, you can pair them with meat, you can have them with vegetables. There is no shortage of what you can do with nuts or seeds in your diet. You do need to pay attention to the nutrition of nuts if you want to think about this in terms of it providing you protein. Per weight, or per the amount of whatever nut or seed you're choosing, it's always going to provide more healthy fat than it is protein. These are actually very complex foods because nuts or seeds are providing us all three components of our healthy trifecta. They're providing us healthy fats, fiber, and protein, but they're not mostly protein. And this is where some people can kind of mix it up. If they go for a healthy snack and the peanut butter or the almond butter is the only source of protein in that snack or in that meal that they're eating, that is probably not enough protein to constitute what I would consider a healthy and balanced meal. And now we'll talk about 4 plant-based protein meals that you can start making for yourself and your family. Okay, so before we can talk about our plant-based meal ideas that provide our body with protein, you're probably curious about what individual foods actually do this. And I got a video for you up here where I cover the top 4 plant-based protein foods you'd want to think about. So make sure you check out that video after if you're interested. So here are the meal ideas that I suggest when it comes to easy ways to incorporate plant-based protein foods. The first one is making a soup or a stew. Now, this is probably the easiest place I would start if I were brand new to cooking with plant foods that provide our bodies with protein. So the thing about a soup and a stew is you can kind of put all the ingredients into a pot. You can mess around with the flavors. You can make it spicy. You can make it salty. You could make it sour. You could even make it sweet. And then you just kind of let it do its thing and let it simmer for enough time. And the cool thing is you can't really mess up too bad if you are just experimenting in the kitchen and cooking for yourself. As long as you're not adding too much salt and you're giving whatever ingredients you have enough time to cook, it's probably going to come out pretty good. And a pro tip here, if it does look a little bit funky, you can always get an immersion blender to blend that soup up and make it a nice creamy texture. So some really classic Mediterranean diet soups or stews that are going to incorporate plant-based sources of protein are things like a minestrone soup. That's going to be a vegetable base. Usually it's a chicken or a beef stock, and then it might have some tomatoes, onions, carrots, celery. It could have potatoes. It could have leafy greens. It's usually going to have some kind of a bean, like a cannellini bean. But all in all, it's mostly a bean and vegetable soup. And it's so tasty. There might even be some pasta in there. You could also see something like a lentil stew or a barley soup, a soup that's actually incorporating a whole grain that provides our body with a little bit of protein. So really, there are just so many varieties in the Mediterranean cuisine when it comes to soup. It is something not to skip. Now, what's the second meal idea for how to incorporate more plant-based protein foods? Well, it's to make a bowl of some sort that incorporates beans. Now, this can be a mixed salad that goes on like a side dish at your meal. It could be a little bit of vegetable with a little bit of bean chopped into it, some dressing like a lemon or an orange or a balsamic, or it could be as a classic salad with a lot of leafy greens. If you're curious for what an example of this looks like, I have a video for you up here where I make a Mediterranean diet quinoa bowl. It's really basic. It's a leafy salad with lots of different kinds of vegetables and the cooked quinoa added onto it just to kind of bulk it up. And it's a lot of fun. It's super versatile. You're going to love those kinds of meals. By the way, if you're liking this video so far and you're getting value out of it, please subscribe to our channel. And I want you to join our community of healthy eaters. We bounce around a lot of recipe ideas, and your subscription helps get this video out to more people who really deserve the information. All right, let's dive into the third meal idea for how to incorporate more plant-based protein foods. Well, this is to choose a type of pasta or make a pasta dish that actually incorporates either sources of a whole grain that provide protein or a bean. So there's two ways this can be done. You could have a traditional pasta that comes from like a durum wheat that then has beans into the pasta dish. So this could be like a cold pasta salad, or you could actually buy pasta made from bean flour. This is something that I don't personally like, pasta that comes from bean flour, but a lot of people love it. And it's just a nice way to change things up. And it also adds a little bit more protein into your diet. Also, if anyone is gluten-free and they're thinking to themselves that they just cannot have any kind of pasta, well, that's not true. There are pastas that are not made from glutinous grains. And for a deeper dive on a gluten-free Mediterranean approach to eating, I have a whole video for you up here. So if that's you, you want to check that out after. All right. And as our fourth and final meal idea for how to incorporate more plant-based protein foods, well, this is the one you've probably all been waiting for, and it's, drumroll please, to make some kind of a bean dip. Now, this is classically going to be hummus. But I'm here to argue that it does not have to come from garbanzo beans. In fact, you can use any kind of bean you want to make a bean dip. So the classic thing to do here is to get some beans in a food processor. Then you add olive oil, you add some other flavorings. It could be herbs or spices, lemon juice. You can then add tahini or crushed up sesame, or you can get really creative and try your own recipe from whatever you want. As long as the ratio is correct with the amount of the fibrous bean and enough liquid component from things like the oil, the consistency is going to be good and the flavors are going to be amazing. But here's where people can get a little bit into the trap when it comes to dips. We are used to making a lot of really rich, thick, creamy dips, which often can provide a lot of fat. If you are in a situation where you are watching the amount of calories that you're taking in, pay attention, because it's very easy to go overboard on a very fat-heavy dip, even if it's from olive oil. And then before you know it, you've eaten so many calories from your dip that you've gone way overboard on trying to control your intake. Now, that's not to say that you need to be afraid of dips for being very full of calories that are going to necessarily have you gain weight. It's actually quite the opposite. A bean dip is going to be a bomb of fiber. And that is just so good for a healthy digestion and helping us feel full and regulating our appetite and overall regulating our metabolism. So now, are there other ways to incorporate plant-based protein foods into our diet besides these four foods? Absolutely. There are so many, and I'm sure some of you out there have experimented with a lot of other things. So I'd love for you to comment below and tell me how you incorporate plant-based protein foods into your diet. I know a lot of people make things like quinoa burgers or black bean burgers. I used to have a recipe that I would love to make for black bean brownies, and it had just a little bit of flour, but about half of it was from mashed up black beans, and it was so tasty. You would never have known that there were beans in there. All right, if your mouth is just watering at this point and you're ready to start making more meal ideas, you're going to love my complete guide up here where I talk about all kinds of meal ideas for the Mediterranean diet, everything from breakfast until dessert. Jump into that video and I'll see you in there.